Please join me, everyone, in a really warm virtual welcome for Kate and Bruce. Take it away, you two.
Yes, thank you. Gosh, we're older than we thought we were.
Yeah, we're like, wow, we have a lot of years.
Yeah. And yes, beginnings and beyond actually makes sense because we both started with, some years ago, taking what we'd learned as children and adults into a career, kind of not knowing where we would go, but it ending up being something that we found, something that we loved, but also that was deep and complex enough to not only keep our attention, but to keep us trying to get better all these years. So thank you, Charlene, for that introduction. One of the things that I thought we might do just to get started was to sort of set the stage. It's quite something to title something, how to help your children thrive in school and sports. But between the two of us, we've had a lot of experience in school and in sports. And we thought that maybe some of the things that we could let you think about could really be helpful. And one of the reasons that I say that is that I was a teacher first, an elementary school teacher. I worked with special education, but I also ended up getting deeply involved in early childhood education. That's how I know Charlene and Bev, because we were all ended up at the lab school at Stanford University. And one of the things that I came to realize is that learning how children learn and what development is a really helpful base. And I was a teacher for years before I ended up becoming a parent.
Right.
Taking that role on then as a parent, I could see that some of the things I learned being a teacher were really helpful in, I think, trying to be a better parent. And a couple of the things that I thought I could share to get us started were things like, well, what is development? It's a balance. In fact, I was talking to my class last night. It's a balance between nature and nurture. So you bring something genetically, and what you've been doing while you were getting ready to be born, and then there's all this experience that you get. And one of the things that's really helpful for all of us to remember, and I think this is particularly helpful for parents as our children start moving into school settings and into sports, is that the whole person comes to the table. And that whole person includes who they are in physical and motor development. It's kind of like a rainbow. Physical and motor development is part of it. Another part of it is cognitive and language development. So how the child develops in terms of moving their body, and then what they can think about and what they hear in terms of and can take in terms of language and directions. Those two things work together a lot in sports. But the piece that puts the rainbow of development together is that middle part of the rainbow, that sociocultural or psychosocial. So how children are with each other, with other people, with adults, how a child is in terms of their feelings and how to express them, how creative they are, even their spiritual development, all sort of connects those parts that are particularly important, I think, in sports, but they're also really important in school. And the best teacher you ever had probably knew what you could do in terms of your thinking and your academic skills and your language, took that into consideration, but also knew you as a person. Yeah. So I think I just kind of wanted to set the stage of that to get us started. The only other thing that I would say is in terms of how children learn, they'd learn a lot of different ways, but they learn by direct experience. So telling someone how to do something isn't a bad idea, but if they have direct experience, they learn better by doing it.
Yeah.
And I think we all do, actually. And then the other piece is that children learn a lot by listening and watching, and they will model what they see. So for instance, if I as a teacher are kind of harsh and abrupt, they may end up either withdrawing because they're nervous, or taking that harshness and abruptness and turning it right over to their family or their friends. Yeah, they'll adopt it. So let's think about the fact that as we begin to try to figure out how to give our children experiences, support our children in school and sports, they learn by direct experience, they learn by doing it, and then doing it again, getting better, and practice makes better. And also by modeling the way in which they see other people working, including how they watch their parents interact with their teachers and their coaches.
Yeah, and with each other.
Yeah, and with each other. Yep.
Yeah, so I mean that gives a little background on the development and the learning, and so the title, if I've got this right, was tips for helping your child thrive in school and in sport. And I think we kind of talked about some tips that we think are important. We don't have these in any like particular priority order. So we just wanted to kind of share from our experiences. To add to kind of what Kate was saying, we have experiences. I've been coaching now for 30 years. I've seen a lot. I've experienced a lot. In a weird way, we also all started as students ourselves when we were younger. So we also have our personal experiences that we bring along with us that help shape us. But I think one of the things to start with is just like Kate said, is that there's a relationship there between the teacher / coach and the parent and the student. And I think that kind of relationship is an important piece in how you can, excuse me, help your kid thrive is really, is about that relationship, right? I mean, I think, I always describe it as the triangle, right? There's the student or the athlete on the top of the triangle, and you have the parents there and the coach / teacher who are the supporters. And we all have our role in that triangle, and that's what our jobs, like the teacher's job, the coach's job, and the parent's job, our job is to support and watch that child thrive in whatever it is, school, sport, life, whatever. And I think that relationship is very important, that is what we need and what needs to have for that kid to thrive. And, as a coach, you see a lot of enthusiastic parents that will sometimes begin to coach the child at the swim. I'm a swim coach, so a lot of this will be swimming analogies, but we'll begin to coach the child at the swim meet, or we'll begin to keep track of the child's swim times, or we'll videotape the child and bring it home to talk about, or we'll talk about the swim practice in the car ride home. And what's beginning to happen there is now the parent is beginning to fall out of that parental role of support.
We're losing one of the
right. And so now,
right.
And now that triangle is getting narrow. Whoops, can't remember where my hands are. that triangle is getting narrower. And now you have two people functioning as the coach, and you're losing that support.
Out of balance.
So what is you either keep it out of balance, which means it's not going to be successful, or the coach now is pushed into that role of being the supporter, which is not what they're necessary, or the teacher, which is not necessarily their specialty, because they don't know that child as well as you know that child. So I
think that's an interesting thing to think about, that triangle,
mm-hmm.
because one of the things that you when you have a triangle, you need all three of the all three of the points to balance. You need to have it balanced. And as I think about that triangle, if you've got the child at the top, each of us then has a unique role. The child is a learner, right? And both the parent and the teacher or coach are the teachers and learners, or supporters of that learning. And so what I would think then is that one tip that I think of when I think of your analogy is that to make that triangle as strong as we can, our job is, if we were the parent, is to have a positive relationship with our child, but also to develop a positive relationship with the coach or the teacher. And in doing that, sorry, we're at home, so we have a little sound outside. But so then the job then of the parent and the teacher is to communicate with each other rather than trying, I mean, I don't know how to, I don't know how to parent.
Right.
That, and that's another thing is that in a way, as a parent, you have a very deep understanding of that child.
Right.
But your teacher or your coach has a really broad, I mean, if you can see this, a really broad knowledge of lots and lots of kids that age.
Yeah. I mean,
So that we kind of have different expertise.
Yeah. But both expertise, if I may, like both expertise are
You win in the
important.
middle.
Yeah, I mean, like the coach and as a coach, I mean, I've probably coached, a couple hundred to maybe 1,000, freshmen in high school, right? And so I have a lot of experience in literally literally seeing almost any possibility of thing that, success, difficulties, struggles, dilemmas, issues, whatever. So the coach and the teacher brings a lot of depth from all of that experience, or a lot of width, I mean, but Kate, you're exactly right, whereas we don't know that single child because we only spend, a couple hours a day with that child, and the teacher, same thing. So there's that depth that the parent can bring, and there's the width and the experience from way, a big database that the coach and the teacher brings.
Yeah.
And I think you're right, it's that relationship. I mean, I think in general, it's I think sometimes, I think sometimes it's easy to think that and there's some truth to it, but I think sometimes it's easy to think of the teacher and the coach, well, they've got this class of 20 to 30 kids, and my kid's just one. They don't really have the best interest of my kid, my child. They have the best interest in, they got to look at everyone, so they can't give the personal attention that my child needs. And I think that's, here we are on a side subject, but I think there's, there's obviously truth, because as a coach, I have to look for the better good of each individual, but also what's best for the team as a whole. But I think that's something that's valuable in the development of the child. And I think that, we all bring something to the table, and we all come from a different experience, background, whatever, that can benefit. Yeah. That can benefit. And I think that's kind of the thing, is we're all, and that's why I love the triangle, is we're all in this together to support the child. And I think, if we're all in that position, I think that's great. Can I segue?
Yes, I think you could, but could I do a PS before you do?
Yeah, PS.
So what I'm thinking about is this, as parents, if we know our child best, then it's in that intersection of the depth and breadth that the child wins, as long as, and I make it like a plus, because as long as the parents and teacher or the parents and coach aren't trying to I mean, I'm not trying to raise your child, but that means you don't have to be the teacher. So it's both and. I think in a way then.
We have our role, but we both work with each other.
Yeah, and each of us has an expertise.
Right.
That if we share the expertise.
Well said.
So then who wins is the child.
Right.
Or teenager, whoever it is that you're raising, that's where the win is. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to be all over each other every day.
Right.
And I think that as what we know about children who are young children under 5, there's usually a lot more interaction between the teacher and the child, in part because the child is young and a beginner, and in part because very often the family is doing the transportation, the pick up, the drop off, pick up, the drop off. When they get into elementary and middle and high school, they begin to go on a bus or walk or ride their bike or get dropped off. Right. But that's where, in a way, a coach is a little bit more like an early childhood teacher, because very often the parents come to pick up the child, or the parents are coming to the event, or they're standing on the side of the soccer field. And so they're there. And so I think this idea about the parents aren't the parents aren't driving the sport. The parent isn't driving the second grade curriculum, but it's parent supported. The kids need the parent support.
Yeah, I mean, I think
that's my PS.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't want to segue too much, but like, yeah, I mean, I think they need the support, and I think that that's part of we both bring something to the table, and we both need to support each other. And I think like when, a child has a behavioral issue or something like that, it's the working together, not the keeping it apart, that helps the kids survive. Is working with the coach or the teacher to address those things. And I think, if I may, I mean, I think the other piece is kind of going on that is I think what's very important that can help a kid thrive in life through sports. I kind of look at it as how do they thrive through sports and school. But I mean, it's the adult relationships, right? I think that ability to have another adult in their life that can be an important piece that maybe brings more depth to their relationship and gives them another experience of being with an adult, because it just widens their perspective. It teaches them, it puts a tool in their toolbox of how to interact with adults. I mean, I had this swimmer who, we and no judgment at all, but like she and I never really interacted a lot. She was a very quiet person. I'm a fairly quiet person. And I remember going into her junior year of high school, and we were talking about her path to college. And I was like, one of the things that would really benefit you, I think, is beginning to create relationships with other adults, like the coach, like our strength and conditioning coach, like whatever. And part of the reason was because when you go to a college interview, you're going to have to interact, have a relationship, and create that with another adult. And I think it presents, I think that's a great way to learn new skills, is having other adults in your life.
That's interesting, because as I'm looking at Charlene and Bev as I say this, because as early childhood teachers, one of the things that we say that children really gain from, it's not just the enriched environment and the materials and activities that you can do. Yes, it is. And it's not just the children and learning how to get along with other children. Yes, it's that. But it's also developing a trusting relationship with adults outside of your family and coming to develop that skill set that you can do. And I think it's so interesting that you say that, because again, I'll say, as someone who's also spent a lot of time now with young adults and older adults learning about teaching, is that we spend a fair amount of time thinking about how do you develop that relationship? How do you set appropriate boundaries? And also that idea that one of my assignments is that they go back and interview 3 people that were important in their life. And a lot of these students will pick one of their coaches. A lot of these new adults will choose, I asked them to choose at least one in early childhood, Charlene and Bev, but then they'll pick someone that really made a difference. And it's often a family member and a coach or a teacher, and then someone who is in the field that they're trying to go into. And many of them have said that was the most meaningful assignment I gave them in the whole, semester. So I think that idea about, helping giving kids an opportunity to develop those relationships.
Yeah.
Because the other thing is, we all had teachers that we didn't like, that weren't
Right.
kind, a coach that was too harsh.
Right.
But then we learned how to survive that too.
Well, and I think,
So let me just
Go
say
for
that
it.
too,
Yeah.
is that I think the other thing that we can do as parents to help our children thrive is to give them experiences, not dangerous experiences, but experiences enough in taking risks, trying something that they didn't do, that they haven't done before, getting better at something, but also being able to start learning to master their own emotions when something isn't working well.
Yeah.
Maybe including learning when to let go of something, also learning to persist at something so you get better. And how can you do that if you haven't done it?
And dealing with that in an adverse situation, which
Yes.
maybe doesn't have a solution. I mean, life is never perfect, and there's sometimes,
Yes.
unfair things that happen. And I think, to what you say is, I think a lot of times, I'll be honest, I'm not a parent, so I don't have as much personal experience as 99.9% of you guys on this Zoom.
Except you have the width.
I
You
have the width, yeah.
that breadth.
But in terms of like, I can see why when there's adversity or a struggle of a child in school or at sport, that a parent would want to come in and save the day, right? It's hard to see someone you love struggling, suffering, maybe something not quite fair, and I think sometimes that struggle is actually where some of the deepest, hardest, but some of the deepest learning happens. And we talk about like the toolbox, like part of what the job of a teacher and a coach and a parent is to put more tools in their toolbox, so that they have this really big toolbox with a lot of tools that they actually know how to use. And I think the more that there is sometimes adversity, Will Smith did this great interview, the actor, did this great interview where he talked about failing forward. When you fail, it's an opportunity to learn and to move forward. And I think sometimes that adversity, and sometimes maybe having that hard teacher who's, all about performance, or, that coach that's like, requires something that seems silly. Having that adversity and a kid learning how to work with it and thrive in it gives them a lot of tools for success. And I think sometimes, and feel free to interrupt me, but I feel sometimes, that's something that I think parents can, I'm sure it's very hard. I'm not a parent, so I can't talk about those emotions, but I'm sure it's very hard to watch your child not having a little setback, having a little suffering.
It's hard to watch
having
them,
anxiety,
it's hard to watch them struggle. And the first thing you want to do is you want to protect your child from harm.
Right.
But you also, if you're not careful, you try to protect your child from any problem. You don't want them to be, and so that, to me, the beauty of sports and school is that they get opportunities to risk. They get opportunities to have something that's hard, and they can come home where it's safe and talk about it, get some ideas, but also they get to go back in and make it. I have to tell you, I can still remember Mrs. Johnson, and she was very unfair. But I also remember that I got through it.
Yeah. And
if I'd have been pulled out of school, and she was, everyone should have, everyone should have been pulled out of that classroom, including the kids who wanted me to help them write their stuff, which I did, and they got a D on it, and I got an A. And neither one of us could say anything, right? I mean, it's so unfair, sixth grade. But it was a situation that we all survived.
Right.
And we are never going to be like that with any of our kids.
Well, and sorry.
Go ahead. That's it.
I think, and we can move on from this, but I think, one of the other aspects. And I can only talk, I'll talk more about sport on this, but like one of the things we talk about is what a great environment to deal with setbacks, because what's the worst that's going to happen if you don't swim a best time in the 100 free, right? It's not like we're making a decision for a Fortune 500 company, or you're a doctor trying to make a decision about someone's cancer treatment. It is literally just an opportunity where if you make the wrong choice, or if it turns out bad, the worst that happens is you don't get a best time. You don't qualify for that meet. You don't,
Okay.
which feels bad in the moment,
Yeah.
obviously, but in the grand scheme of life. Anyway,
Yeah.
I'm distracting myself.
No, because what I'm thinking is then, as you say that, how, if one of the ways that, if what we want to do is help our children thrive, we need to be able to help them build agency and skills. And how do kids get that agency? Well, part of what they do, I mean, we're talking about school, we're talking about sports and school because that's our title, but kids also get it when they're in church school. They get it when they are in scouts. They get it when they play the violin. So that giving them opportunities to be beginners and then to work towards agency and skill set is really an important thing. I think.
Well, that's a life skill.
So you talked about something earlier about building this, getting a toolbox.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny because, again, I'll go back to our early childhood work at the lab school at Stanford. We spent a lot of time really watching, observing children and how they would cope with challenges.
Right.
And we wanted to give them challenges that were within what we call the zone of proximal development. In other words, what could you do on your own? And then what could you do if you got a little bit of help? We didn't want to give kids things that they could never, ever do, and they would feel incredibly discouraged. But we had to give them something that was just it wasn't too easy. It had to be a little bit, what the kids sometimes said, you give us things that are a little bit hard. And I said, yeah, a little bit hard, but are they too hard? They go, no. And then they would try a little bit harder. So I think that idea about how do we help them build this toolbox? Well, they're going to need practice. They're going to have to practice with the tools. If you keep giving you can give them the hammer and the wrench and the saw, but if they never get to touch them, they don't know how to use them.
Right. Yep.
So you show them how to hold the bat and swing it, but you can't be up there swinging the bat for them all the time.
Right.
They have to swing their own bat.
Right.
So
for them.
yeah.
Right.
So I was thinking about that in terms of that toolbox. If the end game is that they have tools in their own toolbox, then we have to give them sort of the opportunity and experiences on their own, independent, or to build self-sufficiency.
Well, and if I may,
go ahead.
I think, this is that, when I'll date myself here. When I was a little kid, like we had a lot of freedom. Like I grew up in New York City, and when I was 8 years old, I was walking to school by myself as an 8-year-old for 15 minutes, right? And that's New York City in the 70s. That just dated myself.
Okay.
But my point is there was, when I was growing up, there was a lot of opportunity for a child to have freedom to make their own choices. And I think in this day and age, my impression is that there's a lot fewer choices, right? Their schools are kind of decided for them. In a sense, there's a little bit of a control of, what's their social calendar, what activities can they do? I want my kid playing violin, I want my kid swimming. And I think what's really great about athletics or any extracurricular activity, drama, violin, computer gaming, whatever it is that there's something that they can have that's theirs.
Yeah.
They can be in control of. When they have success, it's their control. When they have failure, it's their failure that they need to learn from. And I think being able to have that control allows them to learn how to use that hammer that's in the toolbox. That allows them to learn how to use that saw. And I think sometimes if we take that away, if the parents take that opportunity away and start taking ownership of it, we want you to go to practice 4 times a week so you can qualify for this meet, so you can travel with this team, so you can make, the varsity team in high school, so you can get the scholarship in college, right? If that path is created by the parent, sometimes that freedom of owning it themselves is kind of taken away.
Yeah. I mean, I know that we're talking about, there's a lot of right ways to do things, and there's a lot of different kinds of parenting styles.
Yes.
And we're all all of us were raised in a certain family culture and way. And one of the things that we get to do as adults, but it's interesting if we haven't had a lot of practice, is to begin to reflect and look back and say, which were those things I'll talk about Mrs. Johnson again. I don't want to be that kind of teacher. So we get to choose then, which are the things that really did help us and support us, and then which were those things that we wished we could have done differently. And one of them might be what you're saying. Yes, I think that in today's world, for most of our children, at least in the US, kids don't necessarily walk to school by themselves. So they don't have that experience of maybe going the wrong way or dawdling and then getting late and coming in after the bell and then having to live with the results of your own actions, because the next time you're going to make sure you're not late, because you just didn't like the feeling of being late and having to go to the office. Well, those things tend not to happen so much anymore. If we're all driving our kids to school and dropping them off, we drop them off in the front of the school. They just walk in. So if they're late, it's on the parents. It's not on the kid. So thinking about that in terms of what experiences do we give them so that they are able to own it and make mistakes and learn from the mistakes and move on. I think that's an interesting thing, because I'm going to go off topic again just a little bit. Well, just like there's stages of child development, there are stages of parent development or of parenting.
That's right.
There's a great book called Stages of Parenthood, and one of the things that she talks about is that we start with a baby who can't do anything for themselves, and so we have to do everything for them. And then they begin to stand up and roll over, and they begin to talk, they begin to feed themselves, or maybe not, because I was in a family where my mother always fed us because she didn't like things to be spilled, because when you're first learning to feed yourself, you spill a lot. So I wasn't very good at it until I went to a friend's house, and then they all got to feed themselves and I got to try. I wasn't very good at first. But that idea of how then they go to school, and hopefully we've helped them learn some things that then they can take with them to do on their own outside of our control. And I think that that idea, then we begin to start being more their organizer. We help them learn how to pack their backpack, or how to, after a while they learn how to,
what to do your homework.
How you do your,
how to manage your time for your homework.
Right. So you can see they're getting older, and we're supporting them. We're kind of scaffolding their learning, so that but then after a while they can climb the scaffold themselves. So then you go from being kind of an organizer to sort of a manager, where you're kind of
Mhm.
managing.
Mhm.
This is about the time that you can help your kids thrive in school and sports,
Right.
because sports is still has adults
Right.
that are managing them, right?
Mhm.
But eventually, as a parent of adults, as they become teenagers and beyond, you become more a consultant. So now
Yeah.
they're doing their own thing and they're coming to you for advice, feedback and advice. Yeah,
Yeah.
but you don't do that when they're 2. But by the time they're 22, you'd like them to be able to do things on their own. So let's think of this as sort of a continuum, if we could.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I probably shouldn't say this, but I'm going to say it anyway.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, it's funny because when I was in college, we always talked about the parents were your rental units for 18 years. Like the kid rented them for 18 years and then like went to college and then they became consultants. So it's just an interesting play. Anyway, yada yada. Yeah.
So, I mean, in a way, I guess I'll take the parents'
Yeah.
point of view on that.
Yeah.
I'm kind of working my way out of a job.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and that's
if I
the
do
goal.
that, well, it is the goal, because I want them to start taking some of those things on. So those things that they can do themselves, they now have.
Right.
Those things they can't do themselves at all, I'm still managing. And then there's probably some things in the middle, like it's your job, you know, here's the choices of food, make your own lunch. Not everyone would do that.
But it's an example.
Yeah.
It's an example.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think
I have there's a colleague of mine who's a single parent with a 8-year-old, had an interesting conversation last week. She said, okay, so here's the chores that you've been doing here, and now you're starting school again. So you're bigger. What other chores would you like to do? She wrote down some things. He says, well, actually, let me just make you coffee, because I want to know how to do the coffee thing. And she said, well, maybe it ought to be your lunch. And he goes, no, you make really good lunches, Mom.
right,
But
right.
I want to learn how to work that machine.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Well, I mean, and maybe now I'm getting off on a tangent, but it's like, I think what you're saying is kind of true, because, I don't know what the right words are, but like, as a child moves up and gets more independence, and the parent, as you said, goes from, I forget what it was, but the running to the organizer to the manager to the consultant, right? As a parent moves into more of the management position or the organizer position, and again, this is just me, when I think about a Fortune 500 company, there's usually a few managers that each run a piece of it. Right. And so as the child's moving older and you're beginning to pull out from running the day-to-day activities and you're more managing, now you have that opportunity with a teacher or a coach or, a tutor or an advisor or whatever, another adult figure in their life that's important to also help in that organization and management by bringing, that aspect from their dimension, and that just helps in the management, that phase. I'm just kind of thinking out loud.
Well,
but
yeah, I mean, in a way, we've talked about building how the value of children building relationships with adults outside of the family, beyond, so the beginnings and beyond. But the other part is that it's actually helping the parent sort of almost detach just a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. I
like,
take some of the responsibility. Yeah.
Well, that's something you ought to ask your coach.
Right.
That's something that
Right.
your teacher probably.
And that also allows them to own it. It's like, Mom, what event should I swim at this swim meet? It's like, well, that might be something to talk to your coach about. And I think that helps them learn to create that adult relationship. That allows them to take ownership of their activity, which, I think is a valuable skill. But may I move? Yeah. I mean, I think, we've talked a lot about the, and I'm kind of getting summary here, so stop me. But, I think, how do kids thrive? And I think, I think, I don't remember what the title is, but when I think of a teacher and a coach, like, we're here to not only help them thrive in the academic world or in the athletic world, we're here to help them thrive as an individual in life.
Yes, in that part of the rainbow that we were talking about
Right.
at the beginning, that's so important, the social and emotional.
And
Right.
and I think that's, I think that requires a partnership. And I think, and kind of summarizing, we are all in this together. And I think sometimes if we work, it's that whole kind of kumbaya if we all work together. But it's kind of true. That kind of pulls it together. And I think, creating those adult relationships, allowing them to have the ownership, helping them build their toolbox. I think, all of that is what helps. And that relationship of the triangle with the coach knowing the breadth and the parent knowing the depth. I think that kind of, is what's needed for kids to thrive. And if I may add kind of one or two little tidbits at the end, I think, what some might have gotten lost in this shuffle is ultimately what's going to help the kid thrive is if the kid's having fun.
Oh,
right.
yes.
I mean, let's not that
without saying.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I think, with school and sport and, if I may, with such a, our community in the Bay Area is very achievement oriented, that I think sometimes sport and academics and extracurriculars can get pushed from this is an enjoyment and it's the path that is really where they thrive from, and becomes more a focus on the outcome, the results, the performance, and it turns into a job. And I think the more we can pull ourselves out of this idea that everything has to be performance and look at the process and make sure that there's enjoyment. If you, as an adult, look back at as a child, some of your fondest memories are going to be the ones where you remember the joy, right? I remember I loved sailing practice. I loved going on this travel meet. And that's what I think ultimately to help them thrive is remembering that this is.
Yeah, well, as Dr. Sue said, fun is good. Yeah.
Fun is good.
Fun is good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
great. I bet now we've talked for what, 45 or 50 minutes?
45 minutes. You're tired of hearing us talk. I don't even know if anything is important that we said, but
there's some
questions.
So thank you, Bruce and Kate, for a really wonderful discussion. You've given us lots of great pointers, and I love hearing about how there's stages of parenting, right? Because it takes some adjusting. It really does. One of the reasons I started this program was to give parents voice, because come middle school, parents feel really shut out of the school experience.
That's kind of true.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
can I dive in one quick little thing? I think
you bet.
If I may, I mean, and I apologize for doing this, but when you say parents sometimes feel like they're pulled out, if I may add that volunteering is one of the best ways for a parent to stay involved without, sorry, my hand's in the wrong spot, without the management. It allows them to stay involved, to give back. And anyway, yada, yada. I'll zip it.
No, really, we've had a number of really great questions on that very subject. So let's just dive right in here.
Okay.
Asks, and this really goes to what you were just talking about, Bruce. Do you think schools and parents need to collaborate more, or are there separate jobs for each regarding what kids need for their toolbox?
I have a thought.
Yeah, the first thing that occurs to me is that one thing I think to a sense, parents need to be supports for kids doing these school and sports things, but we don't need them to be so intensely involved all the time that we're walking all that these two grown-ups are now hovering over this child. You've probably heard of that idea of a helicopter parenting. If the parent and the teacher are working too much together, or the parent and the coach are are talking together all the time.
All they hear is,
It's
you got to watch your hand on your entry in the freestyle. Yeah.
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 Or, 10 problems you have to do a day in homework. 10. Whoa.
Well, and I will say that
think
on
we
the
can
flip
overdo
side,
it.
I'll say is it's like everything in life. It's probably a balance.
Mm.
It's a partnership of making sure we're both on the same page of what we're trying to get out of this. But it's also a separation of the teacher and the coach have their realm with the kid that they are strong with, and the parent has their realm that they're very strong with. And
Yeah.
so it's what's your saying, either or
Both and.
both and. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Instead of either or.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So here's a question, probably a little bit more for Bruce. Parent asked, what are some, and again, Kate, you talked about it needing to be fun. What are some strategies for parents to motivate kids to practice sports consciously so that if they want some results or progress, they need to put effort in and be committed rather than just having fun and not progressing?
Well, I mean, as a coach, this is what we work with every single kid every single year. And I think the biggest thing is goals, right? I mean, there's some famous saying that's something to the effect of, a goal without a plan is just a wish, right? Or a dream or something like that. And I think, one of the things that I think, at least for me, but so I think it applies to others, is I think one of the things that makes sports so exciting is that challenge of setting a goal, figuring out what the steps are to make that goal happen, implementing those, working hard, failing, working hard, failing, working hard, and then succeeding. And that is something the child does. And I think that's a way to help a child turn from fun to performance focus, is somehow helping them find out that and creating a goal. And the goal should be driven by the kid. And a goal doesn't have to, I mean, again, swimming is my sport. So the goal doesn't have to necessarily be, I want to break a minute in 100 free. It could simply be, I want to attend every single Friday practice, like we do a Wednesday night hot chocolate practice. Like I want to attend every single Wednesday hot chocolate practice, right? And now all of a sudden they're attending more often and they're getting it in their schedule. And now they're seeing performance. And now all of a sudden it's like, I did a 50 for, so they kind of grow on each other. So I think the first step is just going to practice and coming home and not really having a rhyme or a reason or a purpose other than just having fun. I think creating that goal.
Yeah. I mean, I think what this question brings up is that sense of effort versus performance.
Right.
But also that if it starts with fun, you can build on the fun. It needs to be engaging. And if the child or the adolescent, if you're starting to think of a goal, I mean, that would be an interesting conversation to have. Is, well, what would you like to do? Do you want to be able to, or would you like, do you want to work on your hitting so that you get on base more often? And the kid might say, well, yeah. And then, okay, you want to talk to your coach about that?
Right.
I don't know if I don't know if they do batting practice.
And I don't want to, we're getting distracted, but I also think I think that's sometimes what gets missed is fun sometimes seems, I think a lot of perspective of what is taught about fun is fun just means that I'm getting a lot of endorphins and adrenaline and it's just fun. And I think what sometimes missed is the setting a goal, working hard and achieving something is a heck of a lot of fun too. And that creates its own fun, a different type of fun.
Well, but I think both of you mentioned that goal needs to come mostly from the kid, right?
Come from.
I'm just thinking about, because I went to graduate school in Michigan and I was teaching in schools right outside of Detroit, and those kids were really motivated and had nothing in front of them but the sidewalk, the fence, and they had to make their own basket. And they were really good at basketball, and they beat us badly because let's not pretend that fun is frivolous. engagement is what matters. And if you're engaged with other people, if you're engaged with your coach, if you're engaged with your teacher who learns a little bit of your home language, that engagement starts, builds it. And so the fun and engagement build intensity.
And 100%, if the goal is not, I mean, I tell the kids this all the time. If the goal is not yours, it's the parents, it's the coach, it's your best friends, then you are not going to enjoy the process nor feel successful when you achieve it, because it wasn't your goal.
Yeah, good point, Bruce. Thank you.
Yeah.
Here's a really interesting question. What are your suggestions for our youth, perhaps one with developmental differences, who don't seem to learn from their mistakes, who don't mind the consequences of getting detention or poor grades? Any suggestions?
Don't mind.
Don't mind the consequences. Don't seem to learn from their mistakes.
Well,
Yeah, go ahead. I'm
Yeah.
just thinking about, do they really not mind, or have they just decided that that's who they are? So why bother to try?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of where I was going, was it makes, when somebody accepts failure as fun and success,
That's right.
it makes me want to see deeper, because it makes me feel that, like, I don't know how to say it, but there's something that's pushing them in that direction. They're craving attention. They are feeling left out. They don't have anything else that they're finding exciting. They don't, like, there's something that's taking the place of some hole that needs to be filled. I don't know if that's oversimplifying it.
Mhm.
I'm thinking a little bit too about how we as humans take in and decide things based on experiences. And sometimes we talk about it, but a lot of times we don't. We look at something happens, and we look at it and we say, is this all I am? And then if the answer is, this is all I am, then that's who I am. I'm the kid who always gets in trouble. I'm the class clown, or I'm the kid who does, always gets detention. And so then that becomes a little bit of just all I expect. And it's I've sort of normalized it.
Well, I think you and I are saying the same thing, but differently.
Yeah.
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 I fully agree.
Yeah.
With you.
And
Okay. Oh,
so-
sorry. Go ahead, Kate.
I was just going to say, so that's a really sticky wicket, because if I've said that to myself 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and now I'm 12, I've been saying that to myself, and I'm pretty committed to that's who I am.
And if I may,
so it's going to take a lot to change that. It might be you try something different, or maybe you meet somebody new who wants you to try something different, and you risk it.
If I may, I think this also goes to one of the first things we said, and that is this is where you sometimes have to tap into your resources. Like, what is the teacher saying? What is the teacher seeing? What is their coach seeing?
Yeah.
What is their best friend's parents seeing? And maybe getting more information, and maybe getting some that, those are things that can help you in that process. Again, I've never been a parent, but we might feel like we're alone, but we're never alone. We're, what's that saying? It takes a village,
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah.
yada, yada.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question and then final words, okay? Here we go. My child is 9 and has never played any sports. I'm trying to get him to play a sport and he doesn't want to. How can I motivate him to play a sport?
Great one.
Yeah, it is a great one. I guess the first thing I would be thinking about is, if you're 9, what do you like to do?
Mm-hmm.
There's probably some things you like to do, and who are the people you like to do it with? So, for example, if my mom or dad keep bringing up, why don't you try out for basketball? Why don't you try out for football? Why don't you try out for track? It's coming from them, and my first answer will be no. I don't know that I even like those things, but I don't want to try them. But if my friend says, come on, let's get on our bikes and go down and see what they're doing over at the so-and-so. And it turns out their kids are doing soccer practice and it's not really a team, but they're just kind of running around kicking it. Maybe if I was with my friend and we rode our bikes over there, it wasn't my parents trying to get me into a sport.
Yeah, I think self-driven somehow, and like, so that's a great question, because like a 9-year-old who doesn't want to do athletics, how are they going to get self-driven? You have friends who might be doing stuff that they want to do with. I also think it's a great question, and I don't think anyone, if we all had the right answer, we'd all be athletes. But I think part of it is also, I think we have a definition of what being on a team and athletic is. And there's a lot of sports and a lot of activities that fall outside of that realm. And sometimes, like, I just really like to go running. I like to go hiking. I like to just, I have a dad who I cycle with whose son is just totally into fishing. So they go on these big hikes to these outback lakes and they go fishing, right? It's like, and I find that that's athletic. It might not have all the classic forms of athletics, but it's got something. And so I think the key is, and one other thing I would say is I think sometimes kids are reluctant to try things because of anxiety, because they've already classified themselves as non-athletic. Mm-hmm. And so helping a kid get over that hump of, I've always thought about kicking the ball around, but I don't want to, like, well, maybe you and I just go out and kick the ball around, and helping them get over the anxiety, and maybe also letting them struggle for a week or two with the anxiety if that's what they want to do. I don't know if that.
Yeah. I mean, that's an interesting thing. I think by the time you're 9, you have an idea of what sports are, and that may not be for you. But the question is, if I could look back at that rainbow of development and look at that physical motor, what do you like to do that's physical and motor? It might be something else. It might in fact be, I'm going to say, it might be riding bikes. You can get pretty, you can develop that side of yourself, and what do you know? You end up doing a bike ride.
I don't want to get all distracted with this, but I do also want to say, like maybe they're into something which appears to be non-athletic, like I don't know, they love the piano, right? And that's all they want to do is practice the piano. Well, to practice the piano and get better at the piano, they have to strengthen their forearms. They have to get the stamina to play big pieces and to play for an hour. And, so there's ways to then look at the athletics as a way to support an activity that might appears as non-athletic. Yeah. Anyway. But
so Kate and Bruce, I promised you that we would end on time. Do you have any final words for us tonight?
Well, I'll say one final word, and that is, I just want to thank all the parents out there, because I don't think kids necessarily understand what you do. And as a coach, my sport would not exist without parents volunteering and helping, and without you driving the kids and supporting them. So I just want to, create that kind of, you guys are pretty awesome. And just the fact that you're here, and supporting thank you.
Well, and I just like to say on behalf of teachers, teachers don't really want their work to be thought of as invisible work. And they often feel like they do it all by themselves, and they set up all of these things, and they do amazing things with kids that nobody ever sees. So thank you to you as parents for seeing the teachers as the remarkable people in your children's lives that they really are. And I think that partnership, it's a partnership. And that's one of the things that, again, to go back to, the basics is, there's really, who wins when the parents can connect and support what coaches and teachers do. Who wins? your child wins. And that's when your child can thrive.
Thank you.
You, Kate Browne and Bruce Smith, wonderful parting words. Thank you for a great conversation today.
Thank
Take
you.
care, everybody,
you.
and we hope to see you again
Okay.
soon.